charity edifieth. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. But if any man love God, the same is known of him. Things offered unto idols. What's he talking about? Primarily meat that you bought down at the market, okay? You know, it's a lot different nowadays than it used to be, especially in Corinth there. You know, they didn't have refrigeration. And we think, what? How barbaric, okay? The ways of preserving, especially meats and things that spoil, were a lot different. You know, you could salt it. Salt had a lot of uses back in those days, besides adding a little flavor to it, but it was a preservative. So if you wanted fresh meat, fresh vegetables and stuff, you went down to the market, bought what you were going to use within a day or so, because you had no way to, you know, there was no refrigeration. Now, if you were somebody you could get a block of ice, maybe different, okay, he froze it, but for the most part, you had to consume it rather quickly. Well, where did the meat in the market come from? Well, the butchers, yes, okay. Huh? For the most part, what you got had already gone through a ceremony as the animal was being killed and chopped up for the consumption. And part of that little process was they were dedicating that particular animal to one of these different gods, to an idol, okay? So as a Christian, you went down to the local market and you bought some meat, okay? And Paul gets into it in a little bit here, but what do you want to know about that particular cut of meat? Did it taste good, okay? Did it look good? Had it been there for 2 weeks already? Okay. Yeah, you know, some people like their meat aged, okay? You take, you know, your steer into the butcher and, you know, they slaughter it, hang it for a couple of weeks, and then they cut it up, okay? But it's refrigerated. You don't just leave it hanging out, okay? What's going to happen to it? It's going to start breaking down, okay? Now, in some cultures, they consider that a delicacy, okay? I was in Iceland on two different years in the military, and one of their favorite dishes was shark that had been aged. Think about that, okay? Huh? It didn't have a great smell to it, but you know, they would trim off I'm not gonna gross everybody out, but they would trim off the mold and stuff and then prepare it. Sorry, that's not my cup of tea. It didn't look appealing to me, okay? But, so this stuff that's in the market, okay? So, as Paul goes on to explain further here, what do you want to know about the history of that cut of meat? You don't want to know anything about it. Does it really matter?
No, not really, but it does to some.
Right.
People that would check.
And that's Paul's whole premise as he goes through this, Ken. The fact that it had been offered to an idol. That's kind of where this issue that he's talking about is. As for some people, I don't care what you did with it prior to me getting a hold of it, because I know that those idols aren't anything. Okay? They don't matter. Now, other people, it was a serious issue because that's all that they could dwell on. They came out of that particular idolatry. They had been used to worshiping. They knew what happened with all this. And, their whole premise was, well, that's been offered to an idol, and we can't do that. Okay, we don't eat it. We don't even mess with it. Okay, so you got, if you will, the two extremes. The one group doesn't bother them a bit what's happened to it before I got a hold of it, and the other ones, they could tell you the whole history, the whole sequence of events, and it's that they don't want that. What's that? Well, in a lot of cultures, they leave little gifts for, the idols and stuff. And does the idol ever eat that stuff? Never. Nah. One of the priests might, but the idol itself certainly isn't going to. So that that's the whole premise here. And this is some people didn't have a problem with it. Other people had a serious problem with it. And Paul goes on to address that here. And, this all involved in this Christian liberty. And he discusses this. What's perfectly fine with one individual may offend someone else. Okay? So Paul, in this discussion here, how do you handle this? Okay? What do you do about it? Do you force everybody else to go with what's perfectly fine for you? Or do you consider what it may do to someone else? Okay? Verse 4. As concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. So Paul's basically saying, it doesn't matter if it was offered to idols, because that idol isn't anything. It's not a god. Okay? It doesn't affect that at all, because we know there's only one God. Verse 5, for though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many. Remember, the city of Corinth had many different gods, many different temples and stuff that different people worshipped at. Some worshipped a whole bunch of different ones. They would go one to the other. So that was going on all over the place. Okay, verse 6. But to us there is only one God, the Father of whom are all things, and we in him, and our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing that was offered unto the idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. But meat commendeth us not to God. For neither, if we eat, are we the better, neither, if we eat not, are we the worse. But take heed, lest by any means that this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. Okay? He goes, there are those, it doesn't matter what, they're not concerned about this meat's past. Okay? This is a piece of meat, I'm cooking it, I'm eating it. Yummy, yummy. Okay? Now, we raise a steer each year to go to the butchers. Now, some people have a real issue with that. How can you take care of that animal and feed it for the whole year and then eat it? Easy. Have you ever been in a field with them and gotten pushed around by them? It's really easy to take them to the butchers. Okay? But other people say, oh, you can't do that. That's a pet. You can't do that. I said, well, it's an edible pet, if you want to call it that. Okay? That's what we raise them for. Okay? Now, some of our horses we wouldn't take to the butchers and eat, Not in our culture. Other cultures, they do. Okay? But his point here is, it doesn't matter. Okay? Because we know that idol is not a god. Okay? So it doesn't matter what happens with it. But there are people who they focus on that. the fact that that's been offered onto an idol, and it really bothers them, okay? Because they think that if they eat it, they're participating in that idol worship and that sacrifice to that idol. They're still associating that with that, and that really bothers them, which it should, if that's really what they think, okay? But Paul's saying is, just because you're at liberty and it doesn't bother you, okay, to eat this meat, you don't have that association, don't bring someone else down because it doesn't bother you, okay? He's trying to draw this balance here, okay? If eating this is really offensive to someone else, then don't eat it in front of them, okay? You know that, okay? Don't offend them because of it. Mike, have you ever got served something that you didn't know what it was? Several times. Okay. It's always interesting going to a different country because you don't always know what that is, okay? Now, some things you can recognize, but sometimes, yeah, okay, well, so what's your practice? You just eat it anyway and don't bother? Little bites, taste it, see if it's, see if you can eat it, okay? Don't ask, they won't tell, sometimes later, now, we say that jokingly, but we had, when we were down in Illinois, we had the teen group, and we'd have them over at our place sometimes, and Cindy used to make, we called it a spice cake, and the kids really loved it, okay? And this one particular boy, he probably had 3 pieces of it. He kept bugging Cindy, what is in this? What's the recipe? And she, said, oh, you probably don't want to know. No, I want to give it to my mom so she can make this. Okay? She finally told him that the spice was green tomato mincemeat. We'd made it up, and it tastes good. Okay? As soon as he heard that, he was almost like he was going to throw up when he looked at that cake. Because now he's associated with something that he didn't know what it is. And for some reason, he'd been eating it, he loved the taste of it, but as soon as he, if you will, knew what it was, it offended him. It upset his body. Did it make a difference? Honestly? Up here it does. It's a mental thing, yeah. And that's what was going on, okay? People, if you will, they had this mental block about this. Some of them didn't bother a bit. Other people, it really bothered a lot. And Paul was saying, if you know that this is bothering that other person, don't do it in front of them, okay? Because okay, that that's offensive to them. Does it bother you? Not a bit. It tastes great, okay? But don't do things that are going to offend someone else, okay? Verse 9, but take heed, lest by any means this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block for them that are weak. For if any man see thee, which has knowledge, sit at meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered unto idols? Okay, now he's saying, the wording here is in the idol's temple. And you go to this banquet that's there, they're serving meat. Now, where did that meat come from? It's been offered to the idol, okay? But some people that still wouldn't bother, okay? It doesn't mean anything because I know that idol is not a god, okay? But another person seeing you at this banquet or eating there, and they know where that food, what's happened with that meat and stuff, and it offends them, okay? Because that association with that meat has been offered unto idol, and you're participating in this, so you must be an idol worshiper, okay? No, that's not, I've just eaten my supper. But that's the two extremes, if you will, of what was going on. So if you know that your action is offending someone else, even though it doesn't bother you and you're right with God with it, the fact that someone else is seeing this and it's causing them an issue, be careful what you're doing.
You also might think that, oh, it's okay to eat there.
It's okay, it's fine, and then you're going beyond just the eating, okay? Now you're get back into participating in that idol worship. So there's that whole balance there that's going on. Verse 11, and though thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish. In other words, you're going to cause him to backslide, for whom Christ died. But when ye sin so against the brethren, and wound their weak conscience, ye sin against God. Therefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. Paul says, if I know it's causing someone else a problem, I'm not going to do it. Okay? Did it bother Paul? No. But if someone else was going to be offended because of Paul's actions, he wasn't going to do it. Chapter 9. Now, apparently, somebody questioned here whether Paul was an apostle. He opens chapter 9, verse 1. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not my work in the Lord? Are ye not my work in the Lord? If I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless I am to you. For the seal of my apostleship are ye in the Lord. Okay? What's an apostle? Someone who's been associated with Jesus. Normally we think of the disciples because they were with Jesus, but what else is involved? A direct commission by the Lord Jesus. Okay, well, that took care of his disciples because he told them directly. Okay, you are my witnesses unto the world. How does Paul fit into this? On the road to Damascus. Okay, we jokingly say that was his come to Jesus meeting. He had a direct commission from Jesus. Okay, was Paul following Jesus' command to him? That he was to go and be a witness to who? Jews first, but the Gentiles primarily. Okay. So Paul had seen Jesus while Jesus was alive. Paul was in Jerusalem when Jesus was there. Okay. He was there as the church was getting started and built up. But what was Paul at that time? Or Saul, I should say. Okay. He was a Pharisee of the sect of the Pharisees. And how did he describe himself? A Pharisee of the Pharisees, by the strictest. Okay? Boy, I was so far up the list. Okay? And I persecuted those that would not follow. Paul was persecuting the church, those that were following Jesus, because the Pharisees were perceiving this as a wayward or a heresy being taught. Okay? Then Paul had a revelation, a direct encounter with Jesus, and it changed his life. It sure did. Okay? So Paul is accounted as one of the apostles. Okay? Verse 4, have we not power to eat and to drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister or wife as well as other apostles? And are as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas, Peter, Or I only and Barnabas? Have we not power to forbear working? Okay. Paul says, I have the, if you will, the authority from God, from Jesus Christ, to do the work that I've been doing. Okay? God has given us authority. We can decide what we're eating. Okay? Paul goes on later and said, he doesn't have to follow, even though he was raised a Jew, he doesn't have, now that he's saved, he doesn't have to follow the law, the old law and all of its dietary restrictions. Why did God tell them things they could eat and not eat? Isn't that very limiting? Huh? Well, did they heat them real good? It doesn't take long after Moses came down off the mountain and they'd already gone on doing their own thing. Unfortunately, his brother Aaron was involved in it as well. Okay? What happened to those original 10 commandments written on the tables of stone? They got broken. Okay? How many of them had the people of Israel already violated? Huh? Well, the first 4 to start with, but then a bunch of others too. Okay. Yeah, it was, didn't take them long. And it was, God rewrote those for him. But Paul wasn't restricted, if you will, to the old Jewish dietary restrictions. Okay? And that caused a problem with some of the Jews because they were, everybody has to follow these. And that's where all this stuff came up about, in order to be a Christian, you had to be a Jew first, follow all the Jewish laws and customs, and then you could be saved. No, that's not how Jesus said it happens. Okay? That's not the way it was set up. Okay? Verse 7. Who goeth a warfare? He's given a couple examples here. Who goeth a warfare any time at his own charges? Okay? If you're a soldier and you're with the army and you go to war, who's paying you? Are you doing this free? Nobody's paying you? He says, no, you're not going to go to war unless somebody's paying you to do so. The king or the Lord, whoever is in charge of this. Okay? Or who planteth a vineyard and needeth not of the fruit thereof? Okay? You have a vineyard, an orchard, whatever, and you own it. Don't you get to partake of what's growing? Yes. Or who feedeth a flock and eateth not of the milk of the flock? Okay? You had a herd of sheep, a herd of goats, cattle, whatever. Aren't you, as the farmer or the shepherd who is handling these animals, don't you get to partake of the proceeds of that? If it's sheep, probably the wool, milk, whatever, okay, the meat of the animals. Yeah, that's part of why else would you grow them? Okay. Verse 8, I say these things as a man, or saith not the law the same thing also? For it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God not take care for oxen? That's a weird saying, isn't it? What's it talking about? What's the oxen doing? Huh? Treading the corn. Well, yeah, he's walking around in circles, tied to a pole a lot of times, okay, and heavy weights, crushing up. Okay, it says corn here, but corn, wheat, barley, whatever, okay, they're threshing, okay. When you thresh something, what are you trying to do? Separate the edible parts, okay, the kernels, from the unedible parts. Now, we call it, most time now we call it straw, but the chaff, okay, you have to separate those, okay. So as this oxen is walking around on this thing, and some of the grain spills over, are you supposed to not let that oxen eat any of that? No, you don't muzzle him. He's working for you, okay? He gets to eat, okay?
trying to help people understand the rules about what Christian life is about versus non-Christian. I mean, I'm having a hard time tying this to a
Okay.
modern perception.
Okay, these are all Christians,
These are Christians.
okay? He's addressing the church there at Corinth. They're Christians, okay? And he's within the church, okay? They have people that they're doing anything they want because their Christian liberty, their conscience says that's fine for us to do that.
Because they weren't from the Judaism perspective.
Right, they were Gentiles and they didn't follow the Jewish laws. Now, you also had some who were prior Jews mixed in with this group as well, okay? So you had different backgrounds, different cultures competing here and everything. Paul's basically trying to say, put all that behind you, okay? It doesn't matter. Now we're Christians, okay?
That's similar to like you have non-Christians, people who never grew up around any
Mm-hmm.
Christian stuff, coming into a church. The church people are following their conscience, but for the non-Christian who's seeking and maybe just got saved, they're starting to observe all these rules. Because, I mean, in the Christian world, by our own choice, we choose not to do things, but it looks like a bunch of rules
Right.
on the outside.
Now, some of them called, you've heard of legalists, okay? Some of them are real strict about that, okay? You will follow these rules, okay? Is that what Paul's saying here? No, he's not, okay? Don't force what you feel is right between you and God on other people. Think beyond that. Think about not between you and God, but if what I'm doing, what I perceive as my Christian liberty, in other words, I'm allowed to do this, and God is okay with me doing this, but it's causing someone else a problem, another Christian, who maybe is just a young Christian, okay? That's why he's talking about the weaker brother here and stuff. And it's causing them to have a real issue because the culture, the background that they're coming out of, they're used to doing these things, and now as a Christian, they think, no, we shouldn't be doing that. But here's someone else say, oh, that's fine, you can do that. And it's causing a real problem with them, and you may cause them to stumble, to not be a part of Christianity anymore, okay? So what Paul said, be careful what you're doing here, okay? Yes, you may feel it's right between you and God, but it's causing someone else a problem. And Paul said, as he goes on here, if I know it's causing someone else a problem, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to be the cause of someone else standing in someone else's growth, their relationship with God. You may turn them right away. And I've seen churches like this. You know, if you're not part of them, you're not welcome. Have you ever walked into a church like that? You know, I traveled around the military, and I've walked in, and okay, what's going on? You know, because you can feel it, and you get the stares. What are you doing here? You know, it's not like welcome or we're glad you're here. It's like, what are you doing here? It's like, isn't this a church? You know, aren't we here to worship God? You know, just because I'm not part of your group, you don't want anybody else coming in? that all ties together in this. And Paul was saying, yeah, we have all the old Jewish laws. And what he's alluding to here, and as he goes on with this example, is if you're participating in a particular work, shouldn't you gain a benefit of it? Now, he's used the example of a farmer. Now he uses the oxen. Let's read on. Or saith it altogether for our sakes, or for our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope. In other words, you're going to plant a crop. What's it for? Or he that thresheth in hope should be a partaker of his hope, aren't you? If you're threshing, aren't you doing it to get something out of it? If we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we should reap your carnal things, getting paid? Okay. If others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? Shouldn't we get involved in this too? Shouldn't you be paying us? Verse 13. Do we not know that they which minister about holy things live in the things of the temple, and they which wait on the altar are partakers of the altar? In other words, render back to the Jews, okay? Who served in the temple? The priests, okay? Before the temple, the tabernacle, okay? And God set up some rules for them, okay? If they were participating in the worship, where did they get their food and money and stuff like that? A part of the offerings, yeah. Okay. God said, this is how they get paid. Okay. A certain portion of the sacrifice before it would go in to be burned or whatever, a certain portion would go to the priests. Okay. That was for them and their families. Okay. The same thing was taking place, of course, at the other temples to all these other gods. In a lot of cases, they took the whole thing. It wasn't just a portion for those. But this was how it worked. Okay, Paul was saying, we're ministering to the Lord. Okay, shouldn't we get paid too? Shouldn't we? Is that a bad thing? Is what their motivation is. Okay, are they doing it? Okay, am I preaching because I'm paid, or I'm preaching and you pay me? Big difference. Okay, there are, we can name a few televangelists and stuff. What seems to be their primary focus? Send us money. Okay. Very, very small amount of their preaching has to do with the Word of God. It's oh yeah, fame and glory. Yeah, look at me. I've got the mega church or whatever. Okay. Yeah. What's their motivation? Paul says our motivation isn't to make money. And Paul at other times explained, we've done a lot of this and not got paid at all. Okay? That's not our motivation. That's not what we're in it for, if you will. Okay? He says, it would be perfectly fine if we ask you to give some money toward our support, but we didn't do that. Paul actually worked a job as a tent maker while he was preaching there in Corinth, just so they wouldn't be a burden onto that church. We don't want to hinder the gospel in any way. Verse 14. Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live by the gospel. It's perfectly fine if the churches donate, give to them so they can continue on to their work. But I have used none of these things, neither have I written these things that it should be so done unto me. For it were better for me to die than that any man should make my glorying void. For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. For necessity is laid upon me, yea, woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. Paul said, I have such a burden to preach the gospel. No matter what the situation is, I'm going to preach the gospel. Whether I'm paid, whether I'm not paid, whether I've got everything I need, whether I don't. Okay? Whether I'm in jail. Okay? He's still preaching the gospel. That's not his motivation. Okay? For if I do this, verse 17, for I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if I, against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me. This is my reward. What is my reward then? Verily, that when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. Okay? Oh, you want to be Christian? You want to be saved? Well, you give me a certain amount of money and then you can get saved. Isn't that how it works? No. Okay? There's no charge. Okay? Paul said, I don't want to put a burden on you that you have to pay me in order to preach to you. That's not what he's doing. That's not his motivation. Okay? He says, I'm going to preach to you anyway, whether I get paid or not. Now, others were paying him. Other churches were sending to his needs, so he would not be a burden unto the people there at Corinth while he was there ministering to him. Okay? He tried very hard as he went around different places not to be a financial burden to those individuals. When missionaries are out starting work, should they immediately tell the people that they have to pay them a certain amount? Isn't that how that works? No. You wouldn't get very far. You wouldn't get very, you got a small group, you're not going to get much, okay? You get support from others as you're starting that work. Eventually, the idea is to get that church to where it can support itself, okay, and pay a minister. But that's not how you start. And Paul was that same way as he was trying to do this. Verse 19, for though I be free from all men, yet I have made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, and that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without the law as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. This I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you. Does that mean I can do anything I want, and that's what Paul did? Anything he wanted? No. You go, this whole thing here, he goes, if I know something offends you, I'm not going to do it in front of you. Okay? I'm free to do this, so I'm going to shove it down your throat. No. Paul said, I'm trying to reach people for Christ. So if I know that something I'm doing would offend you, I'm not going to do it. Okay? Well, aren't you being rather severe with yourself? Yeah. Okay. But Paul was trying to really think about the people that he was ministering to, and what was his primary goal? To bring them to Christ, to share the gospel with them. Not to go and shove something down their throats, but to share the gospel so that, and he was trying to do everything he could not to offend those people. Okay? Know ye not that they which run a race, now he's using another example here, run for the prize. So run that you may obtain. Okay? If you're running in a race, what are you trying to do? Win. Right. How many people win? One. Okay? Participatory award? Yeah, okay. And everyone that striveth for the mystery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. Our goal is in heaven, okay, an incorruptible crown. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth an air, a boxer, shadow boxing, okay? That's what he's talking about there. But I hope to keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself also should be a castaway. I want to be a part. I want to bring you into the fellowship of the believers. I want to share the gospel with you. Not so that I look good. Oh, look at all these people that are following me. No, we already discussed that earlier in the book. No, I don't want you following me, okay? I want you following God, is what Paul is telling them, okay? Well, we're going to have to do chapter 10 next week because our time is gone here. A lot of things Paul's trying to cover here, but again, this whole theme is that not to offend someone else with what you feel is your liberty, is your rights. Does the Bible cover everything? Well, what do you do about the things that it doesn't cover? Stay tuned next week. We'll get into that. Lord, we thank you so much for